So I'm glad you're here. I'm excited that you're as interested in the books of the afterlife as I am. I consider myself a scribe of ancient Egypt and modern clothes. I love this picture of the palette and ink pen that shows up on the scribe's tablet here. And we'll just go through here and talk about some of the major books of the dead. One of the main things that I would like for you to remember about the ancient Egyptian language and the ancient Egyptian culture is that they very much were invested in the natural world, which is why we see divine beings with cat heads and images of them with dog heads and scorpion goddesses and so on. Because the natural world was the world of the divine. They believed in everything having a consciousness. They were all sentient beings. And the lessons of all the things that the creatures knew had to do with all of the things that we could learn from them. They called their divine beings Neter or NTR. We don't really know if the E's were in there, how they were pronounced, but we have a clue because the Coptic language, when the Coptic priests, who were natural Egyptians, began to speak and pray to God, they would use the word Neter. So then the Greeks moved in and had the idea that it was nature. So Neter and nature derive from the same language. I love this quote by Meister Eckhart because I think that sums up what the Egyptians really believed about the divine being. Apprehend God in all things, for God is in all things. Every single creature is filled with God and is a book about God. So that's what I like, is that it's a book about God. You have books about Bast, the cat, and so we learn a lot about the cat and its natural inclinations. We learn a lot about wheat when we're studying Osiris. And it's not just animal things, but all natural things. The sun, the sky, the wind. Now there's a word which is my very favorite word in ancient Egyptian language. Is called Heekka. And it's been translated primarily as magic. Heekka was code that was meant to proclaim how our thoughts create our reality. And there was an actual prescription for how to go about making magic. The proper words in the proper sequence, spoken with the proper intonation and the proper intent. And that was magic. That was how the world was created. And many of the stories about the divine beings creating the world, like in the beginning was the Word, we'll see that pop up as well. But all of that has to do with that thought precedes the action. There's the thought, there's the vibration of the sound, there's the will to create something, the proper intention, and the way in which it was spoken. Now, part of that has to do with the fact that we don't know the vowel sounds precisely in the ancient Egyptian language, because those vowel sounds, as they were in the Hebrew language, are hidden. Now they're kind of marked inside the Hebrew language above the written language, but initially, like the Egyptian, it only consisted of the vowels, because if you put everything into the magic, then somebody else could steal it. And so it was kind of their way of preserving their association with the natural beings. So there were there were two divine beings here. One is the god Tehute, or Thoth, and he was the ibis-headed god. And then there was one of the greatest magicians in the ancient Egyptian world was Imhotep. He was the scribe, the chief vizier of King Zoser in the third dynasty. He created the step pyramid. And he was later considered a divine being himself. He was like the Leonardo da Vinci of ancient Egypt. And so he was a god and he was a man. And this man knew the God within himself. And because he knew the God within himself, he knew how to create magical things and to make important decisions about the governing of ancient Egypt with his king. So there's the actual title of what we call the Book of the Dead is called the Book of What is in Duat. Duat is one of the names of the underworld. This is a picture you see here of the serpent in the underworld with his mighty coils. And then there was a definition, like the Book of What is in Duat, and then there's kind of like a table of contents. So the actual title is To Know the Boss Souls of the Duat, to know what is done, to know the spiritual enlightenment of Re, to know the secret boss souls, to know what happens in the hours and their gods, to know what to say to them, to know the gates and the ways in which the great God passes, to know the flourishing and the annihilated. This is one of the longest titles that I've ever seen for a book. But to know a boss soul is to know the Abba is your actual soul. It's not a spirit, it's a soul. Okay, it's an eternal being that lives and travels through the Duat, or travels through the netherworld, the God's world. And if you understand the Book of What is in Duat, the Book of the Dead, then you know how things are created. You know how to greet the obstacles in your life, which are not actually obstacles, they're opportunities to be spiritually enlightened, to work with the concept of Ray or the light. And I think that as we move through these books of the dead, we learn that there are many transitions in our life, and each transition is delineated in the underworld. You know, just in the same way that our years or our decades of our life begin to be illuminated as we go through them. We don't really begin to see the darkness. Maybe when we're in middle school, we start to have a hint that, oh, this is going to be something interesting. And then as we get older, we meet the challenges more and more and more. And then there are dark nights of the soul that we have to go through. And then we are given the words of power, the Heekka, the consciousness to move out of these dark places in our lives. So we know the gates and the ways in which the great God passes, how the divine beings come to our aid. And we know the flourishing and the annihilated. But the first written language that we have, the pyramid text, starts around 2400 and runs till 2300. The first Old Kingdom text did not have a written language, but up to the 5th dynasty, then we begin to see the pyramid texts. Now, the pyramid texts are primarily, they're not pictographic, literally in any way. They are the language that is written with the hieroglyphs, which are images. And so they are written by themselves on the wall in rows, columns. Well, in this cas, you'll see bas relief after bas relief after bas relief. They are chiseled into these pyramids. So the most famous one is the Pyramid of Unis. And it contains, I'll show you a little bit more about that, but it contains the entire version of what is the first concept of how God works with us in the astral realm, after death, and during our lifetime. Now, the coffin, there's coffin texts come in here, and you'll see that there's a gap of a few hundred years between the pyramid texts and the coffin texts. So 2080 to 1640, the Middle Kingdom. And at that point, the coffin texts were put together because the entourage of the Pharaoh wanted the same access to the divine beings that the Pharaoh had in the pyramid texts. And so they began to make coffins for themselves, wooden coffins. And they were somewhat painted. They had images. You'll see on this one, there's an image of the eyes looking outside the coffin. And the lid of the coffin is painted with the goddess's image. In this case, the goddess is standing at the head of the coffin. Now you'll see it says 11th to 14th dynasties. There was a lot of dissension, chaos, and conflict that came with the Middle Kingdoms. Egypt was being overrun by a number of different cultures from the south and from the north and from the west. And so they lost their kings fairly rapidly. There were periods of problematic reign. But these coffin texts, again, are from the royal family members. And, maybe the chief fizzer and that sort. Now, when things finally came to settle down in the New Kingdom period, the Book of the Dead is what came from the original pyramid texts and then the coffin texts. And then the Book of the Dead was available to most people. Now, the truth of the matter is most people could not read hieroglyphs. Your average common person needed to have like a cartoon or images of what the chapter was actually saying. Whether they knew what the chapter was saying was different. Someone would tell them what it said, but they had the words of power on the manuscript, the papyrus manuscript itself, and that was good enough to use the magic in the language to protect them. That's not an uncommon idea, for there were, all through up until the Middle Ages, Jewish rabbis who had copies of certain books. Some of the Jews could read the book and some could not, but those who could not still had a copy of the book in their house because they considered that to be a protection. That is the same as the way it was for the ancient Egyptians. So we're going to take a look at the pyramid texts. Now, King Unis is the first set of hieroglyphic inscriptions inside what we believe as a burial place. Coming into the pyramid, there's like a long tunnel and you have to kind of crawl through it. And then you enter into an antechamber. And then to your right, there's the sarcophagus chamber. And then to the left, there is a chamber. They were considered offering chambers or places to put the canopic jars, the fruits, the meat, everything that was being offered for the Pharaoh's benefit. Now, it's kind of a ruined pyramid now. We don't really see the splendor of it, but until we get inside. But one of the things that you can see on the inside is that it is entirely covered with stars. It has this vaulted ceiling that's entirely covered with stars. And this was a depiction of the goddess Nut, the sky goddess, the mother of all creation. And every star that was in the ceiling represented the soul, the spirit, the divine intelligence of one of her children, whether they were currently living on earth, whether they had ascended and returned to the sky to their mother, or whether they had yet to be born. And so all of these are part of the landscape. You'll see more images of that landscape of the inside of this pyramid. And you'll notice they come in rows from top to bottom, top to bottom, top to bottom. And where the sarcophagus is, there is a kind of, it's not a picture, it's an image of a cloth that has been woven, like the kind of cloth that you would put over something, a cloth of protection. And this cloth of protection was made by the goddess Neith, and it's meant to keep the snakes and the other bad creatures from getting into the coffin. But also, it was an indication that when you died, you weren't going to resurrect and travel eastward. You were going to resurrect and keep going like the sun. You resurrected in the east, and then you traveled like the sun at day, and then at eventide, and then, you come back. And so it's kind of a cyclical return. So the east-west portion of the pyramid text talk about the idea of reincarnation. It talks about the idea of living a life and returning and working on, whatever task we have to keep everything moving in the right vein. So they were kind of stargates. There were stargates inside these pyramids. That's what they were considered. And here in the middle image, this is an image of the Milky Way itself that's seen from one of the hills in Egypt, one of the hills at Saqqara, which is where the Pyramid of Unis is. And this was depicting the belly of the sky goddess. On the right is the stairway leading up into the chamber, the Pharaoh's pyramid, the king's chamber, and that's from Cheops. There are no images on it, but it is very beautiful. And the way it is put together is magically created so that whatever is spoken inside the spells, the Heekka that the priest would speak inside these rooms would reverberate and travel down through the corridor. If you were inside that pyramid and sang, and when you hit the note E, people on the outside plateau are able to hear that if you're chanting. And this is simply a representation of another image of that. Now you'll look over here on the left, there's the star inside the circle. It's a little bit similar to the perfected man that Da Vinci created, standing inside his circle and touching both ends with his hands and feet. And that is the image of perfected man in the underworld, in the Duat. So Osiris is a Sahu. These pyramids are connected north and south. So you have an east and west, which is Ra's travel, the travel of reincarnation. But north and south is the area of Osiris and Isis. And they travel into the sky. The north is considered the place of the ancestors. And the south is a very strong indication of someone like a bodhisattva, someone who has ascended but has returned in order to make sure that spiritual commandments are being followed. So this is risen. This is Isis as Sopdet. She's the star goddess, Sirius, that rises, I believe it was then in July the 14th, rises with the sun, and she facilitates Osiris's rising. He's connected to the constellation Orion. So we should be seeing him right about now in the night sky, and you will see that brightest star, Isis, next to it. They signify new beginnings and the opening of the new year, which is our new beginning in ancient Egypt. All right, I'll just read one of these for you. This is Utterance 373. Aho, rise up, Unis, take your head, collect your bones, gather your limbs, shake earth from your flesh. The gatekeeper comes to you. He grasps your hand, takes you to heaven, to your Father. He rejoices at your coming, gives you his hands, kisses you, caresses you, sets you before the spirits, the imperishable stars. The hidden ones worship you. The great ones surround you. The watchers wait on you. Rise up, O Unis, you shall not die. I really like that one. Now, there's another one that comes from this particular pyramid text. It's Utterance 302. And it is very simple. He who flies, he flies away from you, O men. He is no longer upon earth. He is in the sky. He rushes at the sky like a heron. He has kissed the sky like a falcon. He has leapt skyward. And so what you see in this image here is the slope or the side of the pyramid, the angle of the pyramid, and the movement in the spiritual realm. We'll call this sacred geometry. At the top of this particular pyramid, you see something called an Akh, AKH. And that's the phoenix. That's the God spark within all of us that dies and is reborn and dies and is reborn and carries with it the knowledge of everything that we need for fulfilling our karmic destiny on this planet. And it carries with us through lifetime after lifetime after lifetime. It never dies. It is an eternal being. Now, here is the Ba soul, which is an emblem of the ibis standing before the eternal flame. And the Ba soul is, you'll see over here on the left, it has a picture depicted with the hawk's wings and our own head. All right, so that is how you recognize and identify a Ba. It's our eternal soul. And then we have a Ka. You'll see just the arms open like this. It means spirit. It means living spirit. It is not eternal. It needs to be activated all the time. So when a pharaoh went into the temple and said the prayers before the statue of the divine being, he's activating that statue. When we go into a church and we make our petitions, let's say you're a Roman Catholic and you go to the little side chapel where there's the Virgin Mary and there are all the little votive candles, you light the candle and you are activating the spirit of the Divine Mother Mary to hear your petitions. Okay, so Ka is spirit, something that is enlivened. Now, Khat, which is the basis of the ground, it's depicted as a fish, and it is what decays, what does not last. It's the basket in which all of the other spirit bodies, and there are 9 of them, that is contained in the Book of the Dead and inside us. This is my favorite. from Unis, and it is utterance 432. Somebody say this at my funeral. Yeah, because I believe this is one of the most beautiful prayers that I've heard. Oh, great one who became sky, you are strong, you are mighty, you fill every place with your beauty. The whole world lies beneath you, you possess it. As you enfold earth and all things, so enfold me. Make of me an indestructible star inside your body. And I really love this. You can see this image of the feet touching the earth, and these are the hands touching the earth. And this is the body of the goddess, her hips, her head. And you can see that the stars of the Milky Way are all around her. And I love the idea of going out at night to a place where there's not a lot of light pollution and lying in the grass in the summertime and really looking up and seeing that and saying this prayer and feeling that and recognizing how beautiful it is to be on this earth and yet still see your mother. Now, this goddess is sort of in the shape of the Milky Way. And so it's what, when we see the River Nile and we see above it the sky goddess Nut, that is where the ancient message of as above, so below comes from. She is a river of stars and a river of the River Nile. So the duat that we were talking about is the subconscious mind. It is the underworld of Osiris. And this is actually from the Book of the Dead, but it indicates how we move into the underground, the sliding into deeper and deeper consciousness. Akhet is the north-south connection, the light land of the Neteru, which is the multiple Netchers, and that is super consciousness. One of the things that has amazed me is the understanding that this pyramid text was not only just for this one person, but that it was an initiation chamber, so that one moved through the experience of having been placed in a shamanic state, let's say. That's what a technu is, a technician of the sacred, and entering a shamanic experience. So one moved through this shamanic state, kind of in a trance, nearly mummified. Just your head was sticking out and carried into a place where your initiation would take place. You would have to find a way, as you awakened somewhat, you would find a way to come out of your wrappings, and the person would read all of these texts that were written on the walls in the Pyramid of Unis. Of course, some of them are way high up there, but they start at the very top of the wall. The idea was that your Ba soul, your hawk soul, flew out from your chest and could fly up there and read the text that you needed for your transformation. Now, the coffin texts, we'll look a little bit at the coffin texts. They were Middle Kingdom. The tombs were not pyramids anymore because the pyramids were getting ransacked. So they used rock-cut tombs and wooden coffins placed inside them. And you'll see on the coffin, there is kind of a description of the book of two ways. It became a Senet game. And the Senet game was played kind of like Parcheesi or chess. But basically, you had to move along this pathway, kind of like you're moving along the days of your life. And there are challenges on the board, and there are spaces to move ahead, but ultimately there's always an abyss. And if you fall into the abyss, then you have to go back and start over. And that's kind of like your life. There are ways, once you have a knowledge of what lies before you, you can hold back on moving forward and until it's time to leap over the abyss, and then you can move your game piece off the board. But that's really kind of like how we do our lives. You learn to see what's ahead of you. Now, everybody wanted a Sekhmet game because it would teach them what to look for in the underworld, all of the places where they might fall, all of the gates that they might meet a messenger or someone from the underworld. They were depicted in these games. Coffin text 1031 speaks of the dead. I shall sail rightly in my bark. I am Lord of eternity in the crossing of sky. I am not afraid in my limbs, for who, which is the breath, and Heekka overthrow for me that evil being. That is what we call Set, later became Satan. I shall see light land. I shall dwell in it. Make way for me that I may see Nun and Amun, for I am that Ak who passes by the guards. I am equipped and effective in opening his portal. That is, he has the power of Heekka. As for any person who knows his spell, he will be like Ra in the eastern sky, like Osiris in the netherworld. He will go down to the circle of fire without the flame touching him ever. That kind of reminds me of the story of Abraham sitting inside the circle of fire and not being touched by the flame, speaking with his shadow, his shade, an angel. All right, so the individual is placed in the coffin inside the arms of the great Sky Mother. This is a depiction, again, close-up of the coming in and going out of the Duat. Now, there was a Lamentations of Isis, which was a mystery play that annually depicted the death of Osiris and the setting of Orion for 72 days. So when Orion set, and there were 72 days in which we don't see Orion in the sky, the Lamentations as a play were depicted. Now, this was really popular during the Greco-Roman year, but the goddesses, Isis and Nephthys, call him to arise, and they call him to live again. And it was the 72 days of mourning that were expected during the period of time when someone had been placed into their pyramid chamber. This was a negative confession, something we often hear about, originated in Hermopolis. That's the city where Thoth, or Dehute, that's where his priests lived. And it was started out as being a confession that was part of the initiation ritual for the priests. And they needed to recite it in order to prove themselves ritually pure and worthy of their vocation. And that list later becomes chapter 42 in the New Kingdom. Now, the story is that Dehute wrote this text with his own fingers, and it first appears in the coffin text. Now, besides going into Duat, which we have talked about, there is something called the Sekhet Hotep, which is similar to the Elysian fields or the fields of peace. And the concept of heaven differs for kings and noblemen, because the king wants to be a co-ruler with the gods, but the farmer, the average individual, just wants a simple, beautiful life. He wants the sweetness of his wheat inside his bread. He wants the dates from his palm trees, and he wants his pomegranates grown. And if you go to Egypt and you look at these very beautiful scenes that almost seem biblical in a way. You can see that the people are really very happy. They're happy with their families. They're happy with their friendships, with their animals, and with the earth that they are serving and the way that they can supply every need. Now, after the period of the second intermittent period, we have the Egyptian Book of the Dead, which comes to be. And this is an image of the underworld. There are two things there. There's Anubis, who has been handed the feather of Ma'at and the heart, and he is weighing it in the balance. Tahuti is recording the outcome of the weighing. And if that heart is over here on this other side, is not so pure, it is heavier than the feather of Ma'at. It's handed to Amet, and Amet is kind of a crocodile, lion, hippo being that will swallow the heart. And that's it. No redemption. So you wanted to make sure you got it right. So the Book of the Dead was actually called the Book of Coming into Light. It's just called the Book of the Dead because we found it in the tombs of dead people or tucked underneath the arm of the person inside their coffin. Here's an image that appears in Ramses the Great's tomb, where Ramses' mummy is being tended to by Anubis. And the priests of Anubis actually sometimes wore the mask of Anubis as they were tending to the body. Now, that might seem strange to some people, but if you were taught that Anubis, who was the son of Osiris, was going to take care of you and would be the first person that you would meet in the underworld, then the consciousness of a corpse, there is the belief that there's part of us that's still attached to that for the 72 days in which it took to embalm a body. And so what you want to see is not some priest standing over you, but Anubis standing over you and attending to your body, because he was going to be the person who would guide you into the next world. So in this process of mummification, there are 9 layers. There's a shroud over everything, which is the shroud is a cloth with the stars of the sky goddess on top of it. There were 4 golden shrines, 3 coffins, and 1 mummy. So each of these was representative of the 9 spiritual bodies. There are 9 divine beings in the Ennead, or the retinue of Ra. So this is the 4th shrine from Tutankhamun, which I want to show you. It shows the astral rays of initiation that are being received through the Ajna center. And this wisdom serpent, the wisdom serpent is the goddess Neith, the goddess who created you, who wove you into being. You can see there's a circle on that serpent's chest, and it has a shuttle that goes back and forth as if it's weaving. It's the emblem of a shuttle inside that circle. And the wisdom serpent directs the supra consciousness. You can see it putting the energy and the words of power in the Heekka right into his Ajna chakra. And you can also see that there's an image of the Ba soul that is standing before the mummy. And so one is communing with your soul, and you're receiving the wisdom from a divine being working through you. There's a magical story of a father and son who astrally traveled into the underworld, and they assumed their Ba souls and wanted to go down there to see what it was like. And so there are a lot of myths about this duo, Kaimwast and Siosire. And Siosire is the name of the son, and Kaimwast is the name of the 4th son of Ramses the Great. So the story is that Theosophical becomes this magical being, and he has powers of clairvoyance and distant clairvoyance. He has powers of reading books that are sealed inside a library behind, a curtain. And he can fly over there. He can take his soul and fly there and read these books and bring the information back. A story of his battling with an Egyptian sorcerer in order to save his grandfather, Ramses II. So that's kind of really great. And you can see this inside the Valley of the Queens and Noblemen. There's a tomb that's dedicated to Ka Mwast, but it's actually probably tells the story of Theosophical. It's a wonderful story. I hope you get a chance to read the full thing. There are several chapters of things that he goes through, and he talks about all the magical deeds that he does. It's in my book, Imagining the World into Existence. Okay, so here is the boss soul over top of the cot, the corpse. And the boss soul has a symbol bringing eternal life to the individual there. Oh, my soul's a restless bird. Words flow like rivers. Through my veins, water churns on. On dark wings, he flies from yesterday. Love in his throat, the warmth of light among his feathers, the sun risen in his hard amber eye. So we'll end with this one, the Adoration of Ra, which also comes from the Book of the Dead. Sun, your number is one, multiplied by millions. I am but a man with my 1,000 longings for unity. May we never cease to be. May there be no time in which a man must count the days towards some end. Oh, that life could be more than its fragments. No before and no after, no exaltation, but in the timeless one. The sun strides over heaven, crossing distances of millions of years and the hundreds of thousands of millions. One day of the sun. He set rises over thousands of cities, trees, and mountains and men. The distance of the instant. He has made an end to hours and likewise counted them. This morning, earth fills with light, law and baptism. The one of us all endures. It is our work under the sun.